The Holy Gospel of our Lord Jesus Christ according to Luke.
Glory to you, Lord Christ.
When some were speaking about the temple, how it was adorned with beautiful stones and gifts dedicated to God, Jesus said, "As for these things that you see, the days will come when not one stone will be left upon another. All will be thrown down." They asked him, "Teacher, when will this be? And what will be the sign that this is about to take place?" And he said, "Beware that you are not led astray, for many will come in my name and say, 'I am he,' and the time is near. Do not go after them. When you hear of wars and insurrections, do not be terrified, for these things must take place, but the end will not follow immediately." Then he said to them, "Nation will rise against nation, and kingdom against kingdom. There will be great earthquakes, and in various places famines and plagues, and there will be dreadful portents and great signs from heaven. But before all this occurs, they will arrest you and persecute you. They will hand you over to synagogues and to prisons, and you will be brought before kings and governors because of my name. This will give you an opportunity to testify. So make up your minds not to prepare your defense in advance, for I will give you words and a wisdom that none of your opponents will be able to withstand or contradict. You will be betrayed, even by parents and brothers, by relatives and friends, and they will put some of you to death. You will be hated by all because of my name, but not a hair on your head will perish. By your endurance, you will gain your souls." The Gospel of the Lord. Praise to you, Lord Christ.
I'm almost tempted to begin my sermon by singing, "It's the end of the world as we know it." I just did. We get some pretty tough end of world, end of the cosmos readings today. Starting with Isaiah saying that God will create a new heavens and a new earth. Then we get Paul talking about what we're supposed to do at the end times. And I love the translation of the word busybodies. A good biblical word, if you can ask me. But I want to paint a picture for you. The year is 1719 in England. There is political turmoil and chaos going on. The world in England is turned upside down. There are people fighting literally in the streets with each other about political issues. Division is rampant. People are upset with each other. There is a sense that everything is coming to an end. And in the midst of all of this, the poet and hymn writer Isaac Watts sat down and thought to himself, what's happening in this world? It seems as though we are living in the midst of chaos. People are divided and they're going after each other, and that sense of civility seems to be lost. Now, mind you, this is 1719. And in the midst of all of this, he wrote these familiar words. And you thought it was a Christmas hymn. He wrote those words as a response to the chaos that was going on around him, to say that as Christians we are called first to be people of joy. He took Psalm 98 that we sung earlier as a jumping point to say that even in the midst of the world coming to an end as we know it, in the midst of division and divisiveness, we are called to find God's joy. He said to the people of his time that instead of being caught up into the division and what was going on, we are called to look to a God who delights in us and delights in our world. Not a whole lot has changed from 1719 till now. We live in a world where there is lots of division and divisiveness, where we have some language that would curl your hair. I don't have much to curl. If you don't believe me, turn on the TV or the radio this past week, and you saw division on display for the world to see. Impeachment proceedings. And the two parties could not be any further apart. I suspect that singing a little bit of joy to the world in our world right now would do us the world of good. Then we hear our gospel for today. Jesus is walking around with his disciples, and they come to the temple. Now, the temple is a center of Jewish life. It is this massive edifice, the likes of which they have never seen. And people believed at the time that the temple could never be destroyed. And so one of his disciples says to Jesus, "Wow, isn't that pretty?" And Jesus says, "Looks good, but it's going to be torn down." And you can imagine the shock and horror on their face, and they go, "Well, when? How are we going to know?" And Jesus says to them, "You will see signs. There will be earthquakes and famines and all these things happening, but those are not the end. That's just the beginning of the end. You will know that the end has come when I am with you." Jesus reassures his disciples that even in the midst of the world falling apart, he's going to be with them. I think it is a message that we need often to hear. Because here's the reality. We live in a world that feels like it's coming to an end, doesn't it? There are mornings that I get up and I look at my phone and I just want to roll over and go back to bed. There's always some breaking news overnight, and I wish someone would say, if we're going to break the news, can somebody fix it? And it's hard sometimes to want to go out into the world and deal with some of the unpleasantness, to deal with the divisiveness. It is hard work to try sometimes to have conversations with people who aren't able to even hear you, because we've come to a point where we talk at each other rather than to each other. But Jesus says to us, even in the midst of our division, that we are called to find God's joy. So how do we find joy in the midst of this world? I think the way that we find joy is recognizing that all those powers of injustice and oppression have already lost. Think about that. All the powers of oppression, all those things that divide us, as much as they seem to have power now, they have already lost. Because God has already won the victory. God has said to us in no uncertain terms that even the ultimate enemy, death, has been defeated. That in Jesus Christ, every power structure that oppresses and holds others down has already lost. And there's joy in that recognition. God says to us in no uncertain terms that I will be with you. I will always be with you, and there will always be something that you can find joy in. It may be hard sometimes, but you will find it. We are called, my sisters and brothers, to be a people that are so filled with God's joy that even in the midst of uncertainty and division, in the midst of sorrow and pain, we know that God is our constant companion and that God delights in each and every single one of us. One of my favorite theologians, David Luce, wrote this: "We come together on Sundays to give thanks to God for God's love of the world, the whole world. Republicans, Democrats, rich, poor, women, men, young, old, persons of all races and ethnicities and orientation. God loves us all. And we are united not by gender or race or economic status or political affiliation, but by faith. Faith that God created all things and people, sustains all things and peoples, and will redeem all things and peoples, because God's overwhelming love is for all things and peoples." I think he is right. I think that we must be reminded over and over and over again that God's call, God's love, is to all God's people, not just a select few. That God has already won a victory for us. We just haven't recognized it yet. This past week, I took my mother to go see the movie Harriet. If you've not seen it, I highly recommend it. Harriet is the story of Harriet Tubman and all the slaves that she managed to rescue and to change slavery, her process of trying to abolish slavery in the United States. And I can tell you that the movie is going to make you cry. In a good way. It made me cry. The thing that I was not expecting in the movie was the music. The folks who put together the music went back and looked and recognized that in the midst of slavery, the most insidious sin in this nation's history, slaves sang. They sang of a world change. They sang of freedom in the midst of their bondage. They sang of a different world, even though they lived in that world. They sang of a generation to come that would be free and know how to breathe liberty. And there's this wonderful scene where Harriet is almost caught, and she has in the middle of the Civil War a group of folks with her, and she's calling some 750 slaves who were hiding in the woods to cross the river. And she begins by walking right out into the middle of the field and singing, "Wade in the water, wade in the water, children, wade in the water, 'cause God's gonna trouble the water." And you see these folks coming out of the woods to wade across into this water to freedom. It was a reminder for me that even in the midst of destruction and division, God has already won. In the midst of the deepest, darkest sin and sorrow, God has already won. And so, my sisters and brothers, it is a reminder to you and I to find our joy in the world, even when it feels as though the world is oppressing and dividing us more than ever. It is a call to join with Harriet and Jesus and Sir Isaac Watts to say to the world that needs it, joy to the world. Joy to the world, the Lord has come. Let earth receive her King. Is a reminder and a challenge for you and I to go out into the world and find the places where God has given us exceeding joy. It's out there. We just have to look for it. We just have to find it. We just have to recognize it. And then we have to share it. Because joy that is held just by ourselves is half joy. Because joy is meant to be shared. It is doubled when we give joy away. So my sisters and brothers, I think our world needs a little bit more joy. It needs a little bit more joy to the world. And the thing is, the joy to the world right now is you. So go out into the world and let your lives sing. And not just say, joy to the world. The Lord has come. Let earth receive her King. Let every heart prepare him room. And heaven and nature sing. And heaven and nature sing. And heaven and nature sing. Amen.